Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Hi, I'm Wan Ha, and this is the Big Take Asia from Bloomberg News. Today on the show, a conversation with Way Jan Shan, a Chinese economist, businessman, and author based in Hong Kong. Mishal, Husain, an editor-at-large for Bloomberg Weekend, sat down with Shan in Bloomberg's Hong Kong office in June. Shan's life has been one of extraordinary contrasts, from doing hard labor in the Gobi Desert to being taught by Janet Yellen and becoming one of Hong Kong's most prominent investors. Today, Shan runs PAG, one of the largest private equity firms in Asia, with more than $55 billion in assets under management. In this interview, Shan talks about everything from his childhood during the Cultural Revolution to Trump's trade battle with China. Here's Michelle's edited conversation with Way Jan Shan, co-founder and executive chairman of PAG.
Dr. Way Jan Shan, I'm really pleased to be doing this because I think yours is a very important story and perspective.
Thank you so very much. I may disappoint you.
No, I don't think that's possible. You know both China and America intimately. Indeed, you called your memoir a story of China and America. With months of tariff threats and uncertainty, how would you characterize this period in U.S.-China relations?
I think this is probably about the worst relationship that I have seen since 1972, when Richard Nixon visited Beijing. The two countries are engaged in the economic war, including trade war, including technology war, which is much more intensified than 2018, when the first trade war started.
Do you feel that personally, as well as an investor and a financier? I ask that because you were personally part of the moment of openness between China and the US. You were one of the first Chinese students to go and study in the US. You were perfectly placed to take advantage of the free market coming to China and to be a bridge in many ways between China and America.
Yes, I was. And I felt lucky to be part of it when China first opened up after the establishment of diplomatic relationship between China and the United States in 1979. I went to America in 1980. And I was very much a beneficiary of this relationship. But I think we're at a point where America will try to do everything possible to contain China. The relationship was very good when China was far behind the United States in economic size. And at that time, it was a honeymoon period because America didn't feel threatened by China in any way at all. And America, in fact, helped China develop. But it became quite obvious by the first Mr. Trump's term that China was gradually catching up with the United States in economic size. And America is very much used to being number one economic power in the world in the past 150 years. And that growth by China itself is perceived as a threat to the supremacy of the United States.
So can America successfully keep China from catching up or overtaking it? Because I know you said in the past that you don't think that America can really hurt China too much, more than around the edges, the periphery.
Yes, I did say so. And in fact, in 2019, I published an article in Foreign Affairs. The title of the article was The Unwinnable Trade War. I said that the only country that can contain China is China itself by making policy blunders. And I don't think that any other country, including the United States, will be able to do so. A trade war is not good for anyone, and certainly not for China. But I think China is in need of shifting its growth model away from dependence on exports in the direction of private consumption. Private consumption accounts for less than 40% of China's GDP, compared to 68% for the United States. And China has depended on exports for economic growth for too long.
Let's talk about your own life and the extraordinary story that you tell in your book, Out of the Gobi, My Story of China and America. It's about the first 40 years of your life, essentially, a searing tale of growing up during the Cultural Revolution. What kind of home were you born into in Beijing in 1954?
Oh, my parents were clerks in the Chinese bureaucracy. My father was a customs officer, and my mother was a secretary.
Would you call it middle class?
There was no such a concept as middle class in China at the time. And China was the egalitarian society when I was a child, which meant that everybody was equally poor.
I was struck by reading that even as a small child, you became aware that there was not enough food to eat at home. Your mother was always the last to eat, and you could see the difference in her face and her body.
Right. She was seriously malnourished. She would be the last one to eat at dinner table, just eating whatever left over, because there was a food shortage all across country. It was the so-called Great Leap Forward of 1958. It was a disastrous policy failure. During that period of time, many people starved to death. Estimates vary from 20 million to 36 million. Even in Beijing, the capital of the city, people didn't have enough to eat, including my family.
You describe also this collective effort that you see around you and that involves your family as well, where everyone is collecting scrap metal, the little pieces off their stoves and anything they can find, and throwing them into, I mean, not what you could describe as a proper
backyard
furnace.
furnaces.
Yeah, I mean, makeshift, totally makeshift,
Correct.
to be part of an effort to make steel, a
Correct.
national effort to make steel.
Yeah. It was a drive to increase steel production all across the country. So the entire population was mobilized to do so. And I was just about 4 or 5 years old, and I remembered many things related to that campaign, including basically knocking steel accessories on your stove and on your door and everything, and throw them into backyard furnaces to make steel. In the end, of course, you make wastes because none of the steel made by backyard furnaces was useful. But it was a national fever to catch up with more advanced countries in steel production.
And were your parents fully signed up to that? Were they true believers in Chairman Mao at that point?
I have no way of knowing because I was too small. But everybody was involved.
Yeah. But later on, I think, you realized that they were not fully signed up to all of this, that they were unhappy about some of what they saw, including you being sent away into the countryside later. Didn't your father say to you at one point that he had lost his education during the when he joined the communists, but he didn't think his children would lose their education?
Correct. And this is the only time I detested some unhappiness in what he tells me. And he said that we joined the revolution for the purpose of getting a better life for our children. We didn't realize, he said, that our children would not have an education either. And that was when I was just about to be sent to the Gobi Desert at the age of 15 to do hard labor.
But your education had stopped, hadn't it, at the age of 12?
Yes, it was a very chaotic period of time in the Chinese history. And honestly, this is the reason why I wrote my memoir, because I think that period of history, horrific as it was, should be remembered, lest we forget and repeat that history. And my school ended when I was 12, just about to graduate from elementary school, and then the entire country, the school system was shut down. Initially, we were very happy because we thought, well, this was going to be a vacation. But I didn't know this vacation, so-called vacation, lasted as long as 10 years. So I and my peers were deprived of a formal education. During that period of time, the Cultural Revolution, the so-called Cultural Revolution, it was really culturally going backwards. I was able to pick up education after 10 years. For most of my peers, it was forever, because if you lose your schooling for 10 years, it's exceedingly difficult to pick up if you have not kept up studying by yourselves.
We'll have more from Mishal's interview with Way Jan Shan after the break.
Take us back to being a young teenager, still in Beijing, as the Cultural Revolution is truly setting in. You seem to have been caught up in the fervor of it with your friends.
Yes.
You do record that there's this moment that does make you feel sick to the stomach when you see an elderly woman, the vice principal of a school, being beaten to death.
That was the most horrific scene I had ever seen in my life by that stage. To see somebody so brutally beaten by a group of teenage girls, it was hard to watch. As I recorded in the book, we saw it and then we quickly left because we couldn't bear it. And there was so much violence during the early days of the Cultural Revolution. It was just horrible. Many people died in that month of August in 1966 as students rebelled against their teachers or anybody of authority. And many students resorted to violence against their teachers.
And when you went away, when you were sent to Inner Mongolia in 1969, this was, I think, about 16 million other Chinese teenagers.
About 10% of China's urban population
Was sent from the cities
Yes.
to the
It
countryside.
was the most massive de-urbanization in human history, I think.
But despite having seen the violence, you write in the book that at the moment you're being sent off, you are full of life, energy, ambitious, and hope. That you see it as a new adventure.
Yeah, I was a teenager, and to leave my parents and to do something all on my own, it was exciting initially.
And what was the reality in the Gobi Desert?
Reality was very harsh. We had to do very hard labor. The living conditions were horrible. The weather was already very cold, and there was never enough to eat. So very quickly, we became disillusioned. But we couldn't get out of that place. There was no freedom to leave. So I ended up spending many years in the Gobi Desert.
But what was the conversation amongst you and the other boys you were with? Did people talk about rebelling?
No, we were not so conscious of thinking about that. We were having banquets every day by talking about good food. We would talk about what kind of good food that you could get if you go back to a restaurant in Beijing, even though restaurants were very basic and there were very few in Beijing at the time. But we were so far away from our homes in Beijing. So that's all we could talk about every day. At the time, I had a very strong desire that somebody would invent a drug so that you take it, you will not feel hungry anymore. I had no idea many years later that people actually developed such a drug when food became too plenty.
How did you manage to read, and what did you read, given that part of the Cultural Revolution was against learning?
And there was very little time to read after a days of hard work. But I was very curious, and I also thought that someday some knowledge will be useful. But mind you, there were no books. So I just read whatever books I could lay my hands on. And therefore, my education, self-study, was totally chaotic and random and no system at all. At one time, I didn't have any books to read. The only thing available was an insecticide manual. So I read it for probably 2 weeks, and I became very familiar with insecticides. And even to this day, I would have some knowledge about how to use insecticides.
After the break, Shan talks about his life after he left the desert.
You finally came back to Beijing in 1975?
Correct.
What did you find on your return of the state of your family, the city?
Well, the city was the same, but my family was largely dispersed. When I went to the Gobi Desert in Inner Mongolia, my sister was sent to another remote part of China. My mother was sent to yet another remote part of China. My father and my younger brother stayed in the city. So in 1975, when I went back to Beijing, we finally became reunited after 6 long years.
And the reason you managed to get out of the Gobi Desert was because you had passed a test that enabled you to be one of the lucky few to go to college.
It was a strange system that candidates to go to college were elected, were voted to take that opportunity by the people around you. So I was lucky enough that my friends and the peers around me gave me votes, so I was able to eventually get out.
And then Chairman Mao died in 1976, which was a key moment not only for China, but also in your own life. Do you think that a younger generation in China today are fully aware of the extent of the cruelties of that time?
For those who really want to learn about that period of time, they should be able to get a very good picture of what happened. But as you say, it's not taught in the school, so it's not in the general awareness of the younger generation. I will give you an example of this. I was invited to be an independent director of a bank in Shenzhen. And such a position had to be approved by regulators. So I had to fill out some forms. After we submitted the documents, the forms, a question came. The question was, why did you not fill out middle school? I asked my secretary to respond to say, I have never been to middle school or high school or secondary education. And then the second question came. And the question was, why not? And I thought, this person must have known nothing about the Cultural Revolution. So I answered by email, for this question, you will have to ask the great leader, Chairman Mao.
Does this lack of teaching about basic facts to do with the impact of the Cultural Revolution disappoint you? Because the Communist Party has officially repudiated the Cultural Revolution.
Right. I don't think that is so necessary for the entire population to dwell in the past. But of course, this should not be removed from our consciousness. And that's the reason I wrote the book. It turns out most of my readers are young people. Many young people come to me and to say, my parents went through the same thing, but they never tell us much. They have very strong curiosity to learn what their parents experienced, which I think is very good.
When you came to the US, where you were then taught by Janet Yellen in California, what made the biggest impression on you?
I was honestly quite dazzled by America when I first arrived. It was so developed in a way I read about but never saw with my own eyes. It was extremely impressive. The infrastructure was first-rate, especially the highway system. Everything was very impressive. And at UC Berkeley, where I studied for my PhD, what impressed me was how liberal it was. There's a nickname for Berkeley, the People's Republic of Berkeley. And indeed, it was true to that nickname.
I think there were times when in America, the Gobi Desert experiences came back to you. Wasn't there a moment when you heard people using the expression bull?
Yes.
And you remembered what that actually meant to you?
Correct. When I was in the Gobi, in wintertime, there was no fuel and there was no heating. And the only source of fuel was dried cow manures. So we would spend hours in the Gobi trying to collect dried cow manures. And then we burn the cow manures right before bedtime to give us enough heat to remove our clothes before getting into our quilt for the night. So when I heard the expression, bull, I thought that thing used to be so dear to us.
You did go back to the Gobi Desert. You saw those places again in 2005.
Yes.
What was left that you remembered?
Most of the shelters we built, the barracks we built for ourselves, were washed away by weather and rain because it was all clay, mud, and straw. Very few people of my generation were still there. When I was there, our farm had about 300 people. And now only a couple were there. Their life was better because this couple were raising some pigs and sell the piglets to other farmers. A great improvement from my Gobi days, but it was still very poor.
And the difference between your life and theirs, how do you reconcile yourself to that? Your life is almost on a completely different planet
world
now with all your successes in business.
Yeah, but you find common roots. My best friends are friends from the Gobi Desert. We suffered together. We survived together. We took care of each other. And most my friends live in the bottom of the society in China today because without education, you wouldn't be able to make much out of your life even after the Cultural Revolution, right? But we're still the best friends. In fact, there are some photographs I included in the book taken by a friend of mine from the Gobi Desert. And some of the photos are accepted by M+ Museum to be displayed starting July the 28th. I sent the invitation to my Gobi friends, all of them. I'm very excited about it.
Speaking of Hong Kong, this is the city that you've made your home. What would you say has been the impact of the national security law brought in 5 years ago?
I think that it has restored calm in the city. In 2019, the city was as chaotic as what I saw during the early days of the Cultural Revolution. There was violence, there was chaos, traffic was stopped, and my wife and I were somewhat fearful of going out onto the streets speaking Mandarin, because some Mandarin speakers were beaten up on the streets for speaking the Putonghua or Mandarin dialect. And there was very strong anti-mainland tone among the protesters at that time. And we actually considered moving somewhere else because we didn't feel that Hong Kong was very safe. And I compared Hong Kong's national security law with that of the UK. I don't see it to be any more draconian than the UK's law. And most people would not be affected by it.
But someone like Jimmy Lai, who has called you a friend, someone you knew over many years in business in this city, you're almost the same age. It's had a terrible impact on him. He's under trial under this law. And he could face very serious consequences, even a life sentence. Is that fair?
You know, in the trial, one thing was brought up, and that is in 2019, I wrote an article which I sent to Jimmy for publication in his newspaper. The title of the article was Democracy Hijacked in Hong Kong. Because in 2014, China proposed universal suffrage for Hong Kong. Pandemics, and of course Jimmy was a leader or part of that camp, was vehemently opposed and eventually vetoed this measure. And I spoke with some of them, and I said, nothing is perfect, and you need to let the door open. In any case, I sent this article, and he wouldn't take it. He told me that he didn't agree with me. And then I sent it to the FT, which published it. And then the chief editor of the newspaper, Apple Daily, called me and said, Shan, we're very surprised that the FT took your article. And I said, welcome to democracy. In a democracy, I may disagree with you, but I would defend your right to speak. And I think that's very important. That's the true democracy.
But Jimmy Lai hasn't had his right to speak, or doesn't have a right to speak anymore because of this law.
I think that for legal matters, it's not for you and I to opine what is the right thing. I truly think that the rule of law in Hong Kong is very much alive. And that's very important for Hong Kong, because that's the essence of the so-called one country, two systems.
Finally, I wonder what aspects of your Gobi Desert years are still with you today. Does the experience come back to you in your sleep? Is it there in your habits, in how you see the world in some ways?
Yes, for many years, even decades after I came back from the Gobi, I very often would have a dream that letting me out of the Gobi was just a mistake, a bureaucratic error. And I had to go back, and I would wake up frightened, very fearful. So once you had an experience like that, it will be with you for your entire life. Nothing is harder, nothing is tougher than those years. And therefore, everything else I do, any hardship, any difficulties that I encounter, doesn't seem so hard.
Dr. Way Jan Shan, thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
This is the Big Take Asia from Bloomberg News. I'm Oanh Ha. This conversation was part of the Bloomberg Weekend interview, where host Mishal Husain speaks to influential voices in politics, business, and culture from around the globe. You can find an annotated transcript of this interview with Way Jan Shan, as well as an archive of past conversations with leaders like Elon Musk and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer at Bloomberg.com/weekend or in the Bloomberg app. Our special thanks to Jessica Beck and Ed Johnson. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.